The metal beast sat alone on the dirt road. It wasn't moving. It wasn't hiding. It was just waiting. The sun was high and hot over the Lithuanian fields, baking the mud into hard clay. Through the scope of a German binoculars, the object looked like a prehistoric monster. A single tank. It blocked the only supply route for an entire Panzer Division. The German officer lowered his glasses. He smiled. One tank against 5,000 men? This would be over in 5 minutes. He signaled the anti-tank battery. Fire. But 48 hours later, that officer wasn't smiling. The road was a graveyard of burning trucks and twisted metal, and that single tank was still there, silent, unbroken, watching. If you enjoy uncovering the impossible stories of history that actually happened, please take a quick second to hit that subscribe button. It helps these stories survive. It was June 1941. Operation Barbarossa. The Nazi war machine had just launched the largest invasion in human history. They were slicing through the Soviet Union like a hot knife through butter. The Red Army was collapsing. Communications were cut. Regiments were dissolving into panic. The Germans were driving fast toward Leningrad. Nothing could stop them, except for a single crossroads near the town of Raseiniai, and one KV-1 heavy tank that simply refused to get out of the way. Inside the steel hull, the air was thick enough to chew. It smelled of diesel fumes, cordite, and unwashed bodies. The temperature was pushing 120 degrees. The commander wiped sweat from his eyes with a greasy rag. His name is lost to history, but let's call him the commander. He looked through the periscope. The world outside was green and bright. Inside, it was a dark, cramping iron coffin. The engine idled with a low, bone-shaking rumble. They were out of fuel. They were cut off from their unit. They were alone. The loader sat on the floor, hugging a 76mm shell. His hands were shaking just a little. The driver stared at his levers, his knuckles white. They could hear the distant thrum of the approaching army. It sounded like a swarm of angry wasps. "Do you see them?" the driver asked. His voice was cracked and dry. "I see them," the commander said. "All of them." "What do we do?" "We fight." The first sign of the enemy was a column of supply trucks. They came around the bend, kicking up dust. They didn't expect a 50-ton Soviet heavy tank to be parked in the middle of their logistics route. The commander didn't hesitate. He kicked the gunner's shoulder. The turret whined as it rotated, the long barrel leveled out. Boom! The lead truck exploded. Fire balled into the sky, turning the cargo of ammunition into fireworks. The convoy slammed on its brakes. Panic ensued. Men dove into the ditches. The KV-1 machine guns opened up, chattering like typewriters. It was a massacre. The supply line for the entire German 6th Panzer Division was now severed. Then came the response. The Germans weren't worried yet. They brought up their 37mm anti-tank guns. These were precise, efficient weapons. The German crews set them up in the tall grass, confident. They aimed for the flat armor of the turret. Inside the tank, the crew heard the impacts. It sounded like someone was hitting the hull with a giant sledgehammer. Clang, clang, clang. The noise was deafening. Dust fell from the ceiling rivets. The loader flinched with every hit, curling tighter around the shell. "They're hitting us," the gunner yelled. "Check the walls," the commander shouted back. The driver ran his hand over the interior steel. "No penetration, nothing. Just dents." The German shells were bouncing off. The 37mm rounds, the pride of the Wehrmacht infantry, were shattering against the Soviet armor like glass bottles against a brick wall. The Germans called these guns the army's door knockers. Today, nobody was answering the door. A diary entry found in the pocket of a fallen soldier nearby captured the confusion of that morning. June 24th. We have stopped. A single metal fortress blocks the road. Our shells hit it, and it does not burn. It does not move. It just sits there, mocking us. I have never seen such armor. It is a ghost. The commander looked through the slit again. He saw the flashes of the German guns. He calmly gave coordinates. The KV-1's main gun roared. One by one, the German anti-tank positions disappeared in clouds of dirt and shrapnel. The tank wasn't just surviving. It was winning. But the Germans were smart. They realized direct fire wouldn't work. They needed something bigger. They called for the famous 88mm flak gun. This was a weapon designed to shoot down airplanes at 20,000 feet. It could punch through anything. The crew inside felt the shift in the battle. The small pings of the anti-tank rifles stopped. A heavy silence fell over the crossroads. "Why did they stop?" the loader whispered. "They're bringing the big hammer," the commander said. He scanned the tree line. There, 700 yards out, men were pushing a massive gun into position. It was huge. If that thing fired, they were dead. "Target bearing 200, the commander screamed. "High explosive, now!" Loading. The race was on. The Germans were frantically spinning the cranks to lower the 88's barrel. The Soviet turret was rotating, agonizingly slow. The electric motor whined. It felt like moving through molasses. The German gunner looked through his sights. The Soviet gunner looked through his. "Ready! Fire!" The KV-1 fired first. The shell screamed across the field. It hit directly between the wheels of the German gun and its tractor. The explosion tossed the heavy cannon into the air like a toy. The German crew was gone. Inside the tank, they cheered. A manic, desperate cheer. They were still alive. But the sun was setting. And night belongs to the infantry. Darkness fell like a heavy blanket. The temperature inside the tank finally dropped, but the tension spiked. They couldn't see. They could only listen. The woods around them were filled with thousands of enemy soldiers. "They'll come close now," the driver said. "Sappers." "Keep the machine guns ready," the commander ordered. "If you hear a twig snap, shoot." Outside, German combat engineers were crawling through the ditch. They carried satchel charges, bags filled with high explosives. Their plan was to climb onto the engine deck and blow the hatch. The commander pressed his ear against the cold steel wall. He listened. The wind in the trees, the cooling ticking of the engine. Then, the scuff of a boot on metal. "They're on the hull." The crew grabbed grenades. They didn't throw them out. They couldn't open the hatch. They were trapped in their own fortress. The Germans placed the charges on the tracks and the gun barrel. They pulled the fuses and ran. Boom! The massive tank jumped. The concussion slammed the crew against the walls. Ears rang, noses bled. The lights flickered and died. They were in total darkness. "Report," the commander coughed, waving away the dust. "Tracks are damaged," the driver said. "We can't move." "Gun?" "Still works, I think." The charges had snapped the tracks and dented the fender, but the beast was still alive. The armor held. The German sappers watched from the ditch in disbelief. They had used enough explosives to level a bridge. The tank just sat there, smoking, angry. A letter written by a German officer that night described the fear spreading through the ranks. "It is impossible. We have hit it with everything. Batteries, artillery, explosives. It absorbs fire like a sponge. The men are starting to think it is protected by witchcraft, a ghost tank manned by corpses." Morning came. Day 2. The crew had no water, no food. They were exhausted, battered, and deafened. But they were still controlling the road. The 6th Panzer Division was stalled. General Raus, the division commander, was furious. He ordered a coordinated trap. It was a distraction play, a simplified magic trick with lethal consequences. Panzer 35T light tanks began to move in the woods behind the KV-1. They were noisy. They fired their machine guns. They wanted to be seen. Inside the KV-1, the commander took the bait. "Rear contact! Traverse turret! Behind us!" The tired gunner spun the turret around to face the tanks in the rear. The massive 76mm gun turned away from the road. This was the moment. While the KV-1 was distracted by the light tanks, another German 88mm gun was quietly rolled into position. This time, they were close. Very close. The commander saw the movement in his peripheral vision. But it was too late. The turret was facing the wrong way. "Traverse front! Traverse front!" he screamed. The motor whined. The barrel started to swing back. But the German 88 was already aimed. The first shot hit, a direct impact on the turret. The sound wasn't a clang, it was a crack. The shell didn't penetrate, but the force jammed the turret ring. The gun stopped moving. They were paralyzed. "Again!" the commander yelled, pulling at the manual crank. "Move it!" The second shot hit. This one punched through the hull. Inside, the world turned to fire. Shrapnel ricocheted. The loader collapsed. The air was sucked out of the compartment. The commander looked at his driver. There was no fear anymore. Just a strange calm. They had held back an army for a day and a half. "It's over," the driver whispered. "Not yet," the commander said. He grabbed a machine gun. The third shot from the 88 hit. Then a fourth. Then a fifth. The German gunners were taking no chances. They kept firing until the monster stopped smoking. Until the silence was absolute. Slowly, carefully, German soldiers approached the tank. They had their rifles raised. They expected a trick. They expected the turret to spin one last time. They climbed onto the scorched metal. They pried open the hatch. Inside, they found the crew, dead at their posts. The German soldiers didn't cheer. They didn't loot the bodies. They stood there in silence. They were staring at men who had accepted death long before the final shell hit. General Raus ordered his men to bury the Soviet tankers with full military honors. It was a rare moment of respect in a war of annihilation. According to the official war diary of the 6th Panzer Division, the entry for that day was simple and chilling. "Here lies the crew of the heavy tank. They fought to the last breath. They stopped a division. They were the bravest men we ever fought." The KV-1 Ghost tank was eventually towed away. The war moved on. Millions more would die. But for 48 hours, 5 men in a steel box proved that numbers don't always matter. They proved that iron can be broken, but the human spirit is much harder to kill. If you want more forgotten stories of real people who lived through the hell of WWII, subscribe to the channel. This place exists to bring their voices back. War creates heroes, but it also creates shadows. This tank was one of them, a shadow that covered an entire army.